Well, hello everyone. I hope you're all doing well. That being said, it is with a great pleasure to announce that this is the first installment of the series 3 Creepy Things posted for YouTube. For those of you who don't know, 3 Creepy Things is a series that I started on TikTok, of which we'll go over 3 horrifying stories of a similar nature in each episode. So kick back, relax, and enjoy. What's going on, you guys? On this episode of 3 Creepy Things, we will be going over 3 claustrophobia-inducing stories that are each absolutely terrifying in their own ways. This first one takes us back just a couple of years ago to the town of Port Clinton, Ohio, where a 14-year-old kid goes missing for about 23 days. No one could have foreseen the absolutely horrifying instance in which they would find him. Now, the story really begins on the morning of December 20th, 2020, where he woke up and would tell his mom that he felt sick and thus did not want to go to school that morning. However, his mom would be like, "Look, I really need you to just start getting ready and I need you to go to school today. You're not sick, you gotta go." Well, it was at this point that Harley just kind of got mad and stormed out of the house way earlier than he usually would have. This was around 6 a.m. This would be the last time anyone physically saw Harley alive. Well, just a short while after this, a CCTV camera would capture him at about 6:30 a.m. walking along his route to school. However, this particular Friday would come and go and Harley would fail to show up for school. But it wasn't for almost 3 full days that his parents would actually report him as being missing. Now, I know that right off the bat, a lot of you are going to have a discrepancy with this. Now, the main reason that his parents would claim they had waited so long to report him missing was the fact that they were under the assumption that he was staying at somebody else's house. Now, whether or not he actually told them this or they just assumed has not been proven nor disproven. This is simply what his parents would say had happened. Well, that Sunday night rolls around, and as it begins to get later, his parents would now start to get worried about him. And it was around 11:30 on that night that they would actually call the police. And at this point, 14-year-old Harley Dilly is officially a missing person. Well, it was at this point a huge search was launched in the town of Port Clinton. They would scour over 150 acres, including dumpsters, forests, city recycling centers, and the city dump. In addition to this, they would conduct several interviews with people in his neighborhood as well as faculty at his school. But it just seemed like everywhere they looked, they were getting nowhere closer to finding a single shred of evidence as to where Harley had gone. I mean, they are looking at every possible angle that you can think of. Was he abducted? Did he get lost in the middle of the woods somewhere? Or did he just simply run away? That is until January 13th, 2021. Christmas and New Year's have come and gone, and his parents still have no sign of their son. It was on that very night emergency services receive a phone call about a possible body in the chimney of somebody's vacation home. This would unfortunately turn out to be Harley Dilly, that same 14-year-old kid who went missing just 23 days prior. They would discover him lodged in the chimney about halfway down, with one arm stuck above his head and the other stuck down behind his back near his waist. In addition to this, they would find his jacket on the floor within one of the rooms inside the house. They theorized his jacket was shoved through one of a few different ventilation holes that leads out of the chimney and into one of the rooms inside that house. The official cause of death: asphyxiation due to chest compression. Now, for the first few days of this case, as usual, homicide had not yet completely been ruled out. However, just a few days later, they would fairly quickly reach the decision that the death had purely been accidental, as Harley had climbed up on top of the roof and went down the chimney feet first. Now, after getting himself about a quarter of the way down this chimney, he would have fairly quickly realized that he was not going to make it the rest of the way down. However, when he tried to climb back up, he would have also realized that he is now worked in there so tight that he can't even do that. It was at this point he started stripping off layers, sliding further and further into the chimney until he just simply couldn't breathe anymore. Now, this goes without saying that there are a lot of theories out there in regards to what may have actually happened to Harley. However, a lot of these theories stem from his YouTube channel and the fact that he would talk about several instances in which his parents had actually booted him out in the years prior. He would also go as far as to say that they allegedly were not feeding him well enough and that he had to find his own food. However, this little fact itself has never actually been confirmed. Now, I think we can all agree that one of the most terrifying aspects of this case is just simply not knowing how long Harley was actually trapped in that situation before he succumbed to the asphyxiation. Personally, it just seems like this is one of the worst ways somebody can possibly go. This next case brings us to the town of Woodland Park, Colorado. There was a 16-year-old kid named Josh Maddux. Well, on May 8th of 2008, he would tell his sister, "Look, I'm just going to go for a quick walk. I should be back before sundown. Could you let Dad know?" And so he gets up, walks out of the house, and this would be the very last time anyone saw him alive. Well, after more than a few hours had gone by and daylight turned into nightfall, his sister goes up to his dad and she's like, "Look, Josh never came back from his walk earlier today." Similarly to the case of Harley Dilly, his parents would wait an extended time before actually filling out a missing persons report. However, this time a full 5 days would go by before this report was actually filed. Now, yet again, I know a lot of you out there are probably like, why are these parents waiting so long to actually fill this report out? Well, their reasoning would be slightly different than Harley's parents. Josh's parents would come out and say, look, he had ran away several times in the years before, but after a few days, he would always come back. In addition to this, it is said that even though he was 16 years old at the time, he was actually a rather experienced outdoorsman and knew how to take care of himself when he was out in the wild. Regardless of this, a huge search is launched and they begin scouring several areas within the Pikes National Park area. In addition to this, they would contact several faculty members from the school and conduct interviews among his peers. Now, after days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months, the trail just kind of eventually runs cold and they call off the search. Eventually, 7 years goes by before a property owner within Woodland Park decides to tear down one of his cabins, so he contracts out this company, and on August 7th of 2015, they begin to tear it down. And shortly after they begin tearing down the chimney for this cabin, the police get a call talking about they have just come across a guy upside down, curled up in the fetal position, jammed into this chimney. Well, at this point, the then unidentified body had been there for so long that it had fully decomposed and the hip joints had actually popped loose. Well, just a short while after this, they would end up discovering that this was no other than Josh Maddux, that same 16-year-old kid who went missing 7 years prior. Now, their initial theory was that he had climbed up on top of the cabin when he realized that the door was locked, still wanting to get inside. He then climbs into the chimney head first and begins his descent, and similar to the case of Harley Dilly, he would end up getting about halfway down before realizing just what kind of situation he had actually gotten himself into, completely stuck and unable to move. And it will be at this point that over the period of several hours, he would just slip further and further down into the chimney, losing more and more breath every single time that he did, all leading up to a point where he could no longer breathe in and he would die of asphyxiation due to chest compression. Yet again, it's just one of those situations that makes you feel some type of way no matter what way you look at it. Now, to a lot of people, this explanation was simply enough and the case ends there, but to many other individuals, it has just begun. Now, the theory that he had climbed in from the roof is all good and all to a lot of people, but when you find out that his clothing had actually been stacked neatly inside the cabin, you begin to steer away from this point. Now, there is no way that he could have entered the chimney from below, as there are a few pieces of rebar built into the brick itself, just behind the fireplace. In addition to this, some of the investigators toyed with the idea that maybe there had been a wire mesh installed above the chimney as a secondary precaution to keep critters out. However, when they sift through the debris that was still left on site that had not been hauled off yet, they were never actually able to find this mesh. Now, there were just a couple of more things that would strike people as odd. A countertop that was in the kitchen had been ripped out and meticulously placed in front of the fireplace. Now, whether or not this was yet another added measure of keeping critters out, we actually have no idea, and we will never be able to prove why it was put there, only the fact that it just kind of adds to this story. Before we get to number 3, I would just like to say if you are into this sort of thing, I have several playlists on my TikTok channel with the same handle here. And the videos within these playlists will give you a better indication of stories you're likely to find here in the future in a much longer and more thorough format. That being said, let's get right back into it. This last story takes us just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, back in 2009. A couple of brothers, John and Josh, along with a few friends and other family members, had been planning a trip to the Nutty Putty caves for quite some time. Now, let me preface this story by saying this is not a set of caves that you just wake up one day and decide, hey, I want to go in here. No, you have to be very experienced is there are many places that have tight, windy turns in which you have to contort and twist your body in certain ways, and many of the passageways within this cave, you cannot turn around once you have gone in, meaning you have to commit and you have to follow through. Now, these guys had been to this cave many times in the years prior. However, there was yet one passageway in which they had not attempted yet. Now, this is one of those passageways that the many times they had been here in the past had talked about doing, just didn't feel like they were ready yet. Well, it was on this very day they were going to attempt this passageway. This particular passage was known as the Birth Canal. Among others, such as the Soul Eater and Ed's Push, you know that this is not going to be pretty. Now, after about an hour of exploring some of the easier passageways in which this cave system has to offer, John and Josh, along with a few other friends, feel like they are ready to make this attempt. Now, living up to its name, the Birth Canal is a very tight, windy passageway in which leads to a small room, and once you enter, you can then turn around and head back out. So with John leading and Josh right behind him, they begin their journey into the Birth Canal. Now, as they are making their way through all these tight, windy tunnels, inching forward, going up and down, corkscrewing, John gets to this area where there's like a little drop off in front of him, and now he believes that near the end of the Birth Canal, there is an area in which you have to go downward in order to then rearrange your body and move forward once again to enter this large opening at the end. And while John's train of thought was somewhat correct, there is indeed a spot near the end of the Birth Canal in which you have to shoot down to then pop back out, turn around, and exit the caves. However, prior to entering this section, they had actually made a critical mistake in which they came across a fork in which they could have turned right to go into the Birth Canal or left to go into a very minimally mapped, minimally explored section of the caves known as Ed's Push. They would unfortunately choose to go left, and while John and Josh would go further into Ed's Push than anyone had gone in the years before them, at least from what we know until this date. So he starts to go down, and as he's going further and further, he realizes that what he thought was an opening just keeps getting more narrow along the way, but now he's gotten to a point where he can't push himself back up. And before you know it, he has slipped further down into this space and become completely lodged. It was at this point his brother Josh, who was right behind him, begins pulling on his leg trying to get him back up, but it's of no use. He just simply cannot gain enough leverage. So after much debate of wondering what they need to do, Josh would then make his way back out of this area to go seek help up top. It was at this point a large-scale rescue operation would begin. More than 100 rescue personnel would respond to the scene and work a total of 27 hours attempting to free John. And at one point, there was a lot of hope. They had rigged up a pulley system by drilling these little anchors into the wall. And while cranking on this system, John began to move up just a little bit. But all of a sudden, tragedy struck as the bolts sheared away from the cave wall and John went sliding further down into this crevice. Now, it was at this point there was really nothing they could do. No matter how hard they tried, they just simply couldn't fit equipment capable of lifting him out of here into such a small area. And I'm going to go ahead and level with you this next point. I don't know if it is true or not. I have not been able to personally confirm this, but a lot of people say that when they rigged up that pulley system, they had to break John's legs in order to make it work. Now, once again, whether or not this is true, I cannot say because I simply cannot verify that. That being said, they would go ahead and rig up a two-way microphone in order for him to communicate with loved ones up top. And at roughly 27 hours of being pinned upside down, John's heart would finally give out from being upside down for so long. The state of Utah would then go on to seal the cave entrance with John's body still inside, becoming his final resting place. And to this day, no one has been allowed inside. And that is all for this episode of 3 Creepy Things. Thank you all for watching and have an awesome whatever it is, wherever you may be.